The question about whether we'd sleep in the same bed hit me like a punch to the chest. I stood there in my boss's corner office in downtown Chicago, still processing the wild proposal she had just laid out. A fake marriage, 1 year in exchange for enough money to save my mom's life and secure my daughter's future. Claire Bennett, CEO of the company where I worked, watched me with those unreadable eyes. She needed a husband on paper. I needed a miracle. But that single quiet question made me realize this was no simple contract. The fluorescent lights of the Bennett Industries building had dimmed to their evening setting. Most employees had gone home, but I remained frozen in the CEO's corner office, my mind racing through the impossible words Claire Bennett had just spoken. A fake marriage, a contract with an expiration date. Life had taught me that nothing came without strings attached. I had learned that the hard way when my wife walked out on me and our young daughter, leaving nothing behind but a note that said she wasn't cut out for motherhood. Since then, I had rebuilt my life brick by brick, working my way up from junior technician to team lead at this very company. Every morning I woke up early to make breakfast for Olivia before dropping her off at school. Every evening I rushed home to help with homework, cook dinner, and read bedtime stories. My world revolved around my daughter, and I had made peace with the fact that romance was a luxury I could no longer afford. But now Claire Bennett, the woman whose name was etched on the building, the woman who barely acknowledged my existence in all the time I had worked here, was offering me a deal that could change everything. "I know this sounds insane," Claire said, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. She stood behind her mahogany desk, her posture rigid, her designer suit impeccable. Everything about her screamed control. "But I need you to understand my situation before you say no." I found my voice. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand. My ex-husband is suing for full custody of my son." The words came out sharp, cutting through my protest. For the first time since I had known her, I saw something crack in Claire's carefully constructed facade. "Derek comes from old money. His family has connections in every courthouse in this state. His lawyers are arguing that I'm an unfit mother because I prioritize work over family. They're saying Caleb needs a stable home environment, and apparently a single mother running a company doesn't qualify." She walked to the window, her reflection ghost-like against the city lights below. "The hearing is coming up. My lawyer says if I can demonstrate a stable family unit, a husband, a home life, the whole picture, it could tip the scales in my favor." I shook my head slowly. "And you chose me because I've watched you, Ryan." Claire turned to face me. "In all the time I've seen you leave meetings early because you needed to pick up your daughter. I've seen you take calls from her school and handle them with more grace than most executives handle million-dollar deals. I've seen the way your colleagues talk about you, how you never miss a parent-teacher conference, how you coach her little league team on weekends." Her eyes met mine. "You're the best father I've ever seen, and right now, I need everyone to believe that you're also my husband." The compliment landed somewhere between flattering and uncomfortable. I shifted my weight, suddenly aware of how out of place I looked in this office, my work boots scuffed, my jacket worn at the elbows, my hands calloused from years of manual labor before I moved into management. "There's another reason," I said quietly. "You know I need money." Claire didn't flinch. "Your mother's medical bills, the second mortgage on your house, Olivia's school tuition that's overdue." I had to do my research. I needed to know you had enough reason to consider this. I felt the familiar burn of shame rise in my chest. I thought I had hidden it well, the way I had been drowning since my mom's diagnosis. The hospital bills alone had eaten through my savings. Then came the experimental treatments. Insurance refused to cover the specialists who demanded payment up front, the loan sharks who circled like vultures when the banks turned me away. "This is what I'm offering," Claire continued. "Marry me on paper, live in my home for 1 year, attend family events, stand beside me in court, let the world see us as a real couple. In exchange, I will pay off every debt you have. I will cover your mother's medical expenses in full. And when the year is over, you walk away with enough money to secure Olivia's future through college." The numbers she quoted made my head spin. It was more money than I would earn in a decade. And if I say no, I asked, then I walk out of this office and we never speak of this again. Claire's voice remained even. I won't retaliate. Your job is secure regardless of your decision. This has to be your choice. I thought about Olivia, about the way she had asked me why we couldn't go to the movies like her friends did with their families. I thought about my mom lying in that hospital bed waiting for a surgery we couldn't afford. I thought about the eviction notice I had hidden in my desk drawer, the one that gave me time to come up with the missed mortgage payments. And I thought about my pride, the only thing I had left that no one could take from me. No. The word came out harder than I intended. I'm not for sale, Miss Bennett. Whatever you think you know about my situation, I'm not going to play pretend husband so you can win a custody battle. Find someone else. I was halfway to the door when her voice stopped me. Ryan. It was the first time she had ever called me by my first name. I'm sorry if I made you feel like a transaction. That wasn't my intention. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I looked at her, I might see the desperation in her eyes, the same desperation I saw in my own mirror every morning. And if I saw that, I might start to understand her, I might start to sympathize, and then I might say yes. Good night, Miss Bennett. The drive home felt endless through traffic. I spent every second of it arguing with myself, replaying the conversation, wondering if I had just thrown away my daughter's future because of stubborn pride. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had almost convinced myself I had made the right choice. Then my phone rang. The caller ID showed Mercy Hospital, and my heart stopped. Mr. Mitchell, this is Dr. Williams. I'm calling about your mother, Patricia. Her condition has deteriorated significantly. We need to perform emergency surgery, or I'm afraid. The doctor's voice faded into clinical terms I barely registered, words like cardiac failure and immediate intervention and significant risk, but one phrase cut through the medical jargon like a knife. The estimated cost for the procedure and post-operative care would be substantial. We would need confirmation of payment before we could proceed. I sat in my car for a long time after the call ended. The porch light of my small house glowed warm against the darkness. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor who watched Olivia in the evenings, helping my daughter with what looked like a puzzle. Olivia was laughing at something, her whole face lighting up the way only a child's could. She had no idea that her grandmother might not survive. She had no idea that her father was about to lose everything. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had memorized earlier that evening. Claire answered on the first ring. Ryan, I have conditions. My voice was rough. Olivia doesn't get hurt in any of this. She's not a prop for your custody case. She's my daughter and she comes first, always. Of course, this is strictly professional. No physical relationship, separate lives behind closed doors. Agreed. And when the year is up, we part ways clean. No complications, no drama. You have my word. I closed my eyes. Then I'll do it. I'll marry you. I heard Claire exhale on the other end of the line. Relief, perhaps, or maybe something more complicated. Thank you, Ryan. You won't regret this. One more thing. I gripped the steering wheel, steadying myself. That question you asked me in your office about the bed. Silence stretched between us. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Claire finally said. For now, let's focus on keeping our story straight. I ended the call and sat in the darkness for another moment, staring at the life I was about to leave behind. The modest house, the struggling neighborhood, the careful routines I had built to keep my daughter safe and loved. Soon I would be moving into a mansion. Before long, I would be married to one of the wealthiest women in the city. And in a year, if everything went according to plan, I would walk away a free man with my debts erased and my family secure. But as I watched my daughter's silhouette through the window, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that nothing ever went according to plan, and that question, will we sleep in the same bed, echoed in my thoughts long into the night. The Bennett mansion rose against the sky like something from a different world. I stood at the iron gates with 2 suitcases and my daughter's hand in mine, feeling like an intruder about to trespass on sacred ground. Daddy, is this a castle? Olivia whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the manicured lawns, the fountain in the circular driveway, the columns that framed the entrance. It's our new home, I said, the words feeling strange on my tongue, for a while at least. The wedding had been quick and quiet, a courthouse ceremony with 2 witnesses and a judge who barely looked up from his paperwork. Claire had worn a simple cream dress. I had worn my only suit. We had exchanged rings that cost more than my car, and when the judge pronounced us husband and wife, neither of us moved to kiss. Now, a few days later, we were beginning our life as a family. Claire opened the front door before we reached it. Behind her stood a small boy with sandy brown hair and curious eyes, Caleb. I remembered him from the photos in her office, the boy who was the reason for all of this. Caleb, this is Ryan and his daughter Olivia, Claire said, her voice softer than I had ever heard it at the office. They're going to live with us now. Caleb studied me with the unfiltered intensity only children possess. Are you my new dad? The question hit me like a physical blow. I glanced at Claire, uncertain how to respond, but she was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. I'm going to be around, I said carefully. We can figure out the rest as we go. Caleb seemed to accept this answer. His attention shifted to Olivia, who had pressed herself against my leg like she was trying to disappear. Do you want to see my room? I have a race car bed. Olivia shook her head without speaking, her grip on my hand tightening. Maybe later, I said. She needs some time to settle in. The first week brought the news I had been praying for. Claire had arranged for the best cardiac surgeon in the state to perform my mother's operation. And a few days after we moved into the mansion, Dr. Williams called to say the surgery had been a complete success. Patricia Mitchell would need months of recovery, but she would live. I wept alone in the guest bathroom that night, overwhelmed with gratitude I didn't know how to express. The rest of that first month was an exercise in careful navigation. Olivia and I occupied the guest wing on the east side of the house, while Claire and Caleb remained in the main living quarters. We ate meals together in the formal dining room, the conversation stilted and polite, 4 strangers pretending to be something they weren't. At work, the whispers started almost immediately. Did you hear Mitchell married the boss, moved into her mansion and everything? Convenient timing, don't you think? Right when everyone knows he's been struggling to make rent. I always knew there was something going on between them. You don't just marry your CEO out of nowhere. I pretended not to hear, but the words followed me through the halls like shadows. I caught colleagues glancing at my new wedding ring, saw the knowing looks exchanged behind my back. The assumption was clear. I had sold myself for money. The black man from the maintenance department who had clawed his way into management had finally found an easier path up. What hurt most was that they weren't entirely wrong. A few weeks into the arrangement, Claire's mother came to visit. Helen Bennett was a woman who had perfected the art of polite cruelty. She sat in the living room with her legs crossed and her pearls perfectly arranged, sipping tea while her eyes dissected me like I was an insect under glass. So, she said, her smile never wavering. Tell me about your family, Ryan. Where did you grow up? Southside, I replied. My mother still lives there. Southside, Helen repeated the words as though they left a bad taste in her mouth. And your father passed away when I was young. I see. And what did he do before he passed? He worked construction, built half the bridges in this city. Helen's smile thinned. How industrious. Claire cut in before her mother could continue. Ryan is the head of our technical operations division. He's been invaluable to the company for years. I'm sure he has. Helen set down her teacup with a delicate clink. I'm just trying to understand, darling. You've had suitors from some of the finest families on the East Coast, investment bankers, senators' sons, that lovely Rhodes Scholar from Yale. And you chose, she gestured vaguely in my direction, this. I felt the familiar heat of anger rising in my chest. But Claire spoke before I could respond. I chose a good man who treats Caleb like his own son, she said, her voice ice. I would think that matters more than pedigree. Helen's expression flickered. Surprise, perhaps, or calculation. Of course, dear. I'm sure you know what you're doing. She left an hour later, but her presence lingered like perfume that had overstayed its welcome. That night, Claire found me on the back patio staring out at the pool. I'm sorry about my mother, she said, taking the seat beside me. I shrugged. I've heard worse. That doesn't make it acceptable. We sat in silence for a moment, the night air cool against our skin. She's not wrong, you know, I said quietly. People look at us and they see exactly what she sees. The ambitious employee who married the boss, the black guy who found his meal ticket. Claire turned to face me. Is that what you think this is? I think it doesn't matter what I think. It matters what everyone else sees. You're wrong. Her voice was firm. What matters is Caleb. What matters is Olivia. What matters is getting through this year and keeping our children safe. She held my gaze. Everything else is noise. I wanted to believe her more than I expected. I wanted to believe that we were partners in this, not just actors playing our assigned roles. But before I could respond, Claire's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and her expression hardened. That was my lawyer. Derek hired a private investigator. He's having us watched. The news changed everything. Within days, Claire's attorney laid out the new reality in stark terms. If the investigator documented evidence that our marriage was a sham, separate bedrooms, separate lives, no genuine intimacy, Derek would use it to destroy Claire's custody case. The court would see her as a fraud, a desperate woman willing to manufacture a fake family to manipulate the legal system. You need to share a bedroom, the lawyer said bluntly during our consultation, at minimum. Ideally, you should be seen acting like a real married couple whenever you're in public view. And sometimes when you think you're in private, assume you're being watched at all times. That night, I stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, my pillow tucked under my arm like a shield. Claire was already in bed, dressed in silk pajamas, a book open on her lap that she clearly wasn't reading. The California King seemed to stretch between us like an ocean. We don't have to, she started. It's fine. I crossed to the far side of the bed and began arranging pillows down the center, building a barrier between my side and hers. I'll stay on my half, you stay on yours. We're just two people sleeping in the same room. I lay down with my back to her, my body rigid, my heart pounding harder than I wanted to admit. For a long time, neither of us spoke. I stared at the wall, hyper aware of every breath she took, every small movement that rustled the sheets. Then softly, I heard her voice in the darkness. Thank you for being here. I know this isn't what you signed up for. I closed my eyes. I signed up for whatever it takes. Go to sleep, Claire. As the months passed, the lines I had so carefully drawn began to blur. It started with Caleb. The boy was young and starving for male attention. His father, Derek, had been more interested in business deals than bedtime stories, more focused on appearances than actual parenting. So when I offered to teach him how to throw a football in the backyard, Caleb latched on with desperate enthusiasm. Higher, Ryan, throw it higher. You got to learn to catch the low ones first, buddy. That's where the real skill is. Every evening after work, I found myself in the backyard with Caleb, running drills and practicing catches until the sun went down. I taught the boy how to tie his shoes, how to ride a bike without training wheels, how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich without getting jelly all over the counter. One night, as I tucked Caleb into bed, a habit that had developed without either of us planning it, the boy looked up at me with sleepy eyes. Ryan, can I call you Dad? The question stole the breath from my lungs. I thought about the contract, the expiration date, the inevitable ending that would come. How about you call me Dad Ryan for now? I said carefully. That way it's special just between us. Caleb smiled, already half asleep. Okay, Dad Ryan, good night. I stood in the doorway for a long time after the boy's breathing had steadied, wondering when this had stopped being an act. Meanwhile, Claire was waging her own quiet campaign. Olivia had remained distant and suspicious for weeks, retreating to her room whenever Claire approached, responding to questions with single syllables and guarded eyes. But Claire didn't give up. She learned which cartoon characters Olivia loved. She studied YouTube tutorials on how to braid hair. She stocked the pantry with Olivia's favorite snacks without ever mentioning that she had noticed them. The breakthrough came on a rainy Saturday afternoon. I was working in the study when I heard it. Laughter, bright and genuine, floating up from the living room. I followed the sound and found Claire and Olivia on the couch surrounded by nail polish bottles in every color of the rainbow. Olivia was painting Claire's nails hot pink, her tongue poking out in concentration, while Claire pretended to critique the somewhat messy results. "This one's crooked," Claire said, holding up her thumb with exaggerated seriousness. "Art isn't supposed to be perfect," Olivia replied, a phrase she had clearly learned from somewhere. "Mrs. Patterson says so." "Well, if Mrs. Patterson says so, then it must be true." Olivia giggled, and I felt something shift in my chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the contract or the money or the legal battles ahead. The nights grew easier, too. I stopped building my pillow fortress. Claire stopped pretending to read. Instead, we talked quietly, carefully, learning each other's histories in fragments. Claire told me about growing up in the shadow of the Bennett name, expected to be perfect, punished for every deviation from the plan her parents had laid out. She told me about marrying Derek because it was expected, about realizing too late that he saw her as an acquisition, not a partner. She told me about the loneliness of being surrounded by people who only wanted what she could give them. I told her about my father's calloused hands, about the pride in his voice when he pointed out the bridges he had built. I told her about my mother's unwavering faith, about working 2 jobs through college, about the night my wife left and how I had sat on the kitchen floor until dawn holding baby Olivia and wondering how I would possibly do this alone. "But you did it," Claire said one night, her voice soft in the darkness. "You raised an incredible little girl." I did what any parent would do. No. She turned to face me, and even in the dim light I could see the intensity in her eyes. "You did what a good parent would do. There's a difference." It was on one of those nights that everything changed. I woke to the sound of screaming, high-pitched and terrified, coming from down the hall. I was out of bed before I was fully conscious, my feet carrying me toward the sound. But when I reached Olivia's room, Claire was already there. She sat on the edge of the bed, Olivia wrapped in her arms, rocking gently as she hummed a lullaby I had never heard. Olivia's sobs were subsiding into hiccups, her small hands clutching Claire's nightgown like a lifeline. "Mommy," Olivia whimpered. "I want Mommy." And Claire, controlled, composed, untouchable, held her tighter and whispered, "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here." I watched from the doorway, something breaking open inside me. When the contract ended, I would have to take my daughter away from the only mother figure she had ever truly bonded with. For the first time, the end of the contract felt less like freedom and more like loss. Then, with only weeks left before the custody hearing, everything collapsed. The story broke on a Tuesday morning, splashed across every tabloid and news site in the city. CEO's fake marriage exposed, Bennett paid employee to play husband. The article featured photographs taken through windows, me sleeping on the far side of the bed those first weeks, the pillow barrier clearly visible between us. There were quotes from an anonymous source close to the family describing the arrangement in damning detail. I knew immediately who had talked. Jennifer, Claire's former assistant, had been fired months ago for mishandling sensitive documents. Derek must have found her, offered her money, given her the chance for revenge. The fallout was immediate and devastating. At work, colleagues who had merely whispered before now openly stared. I heard them in the break room, on the elevator, in the parking garage. Opportunist, con man, gold digger. The words cut deeper than I expected, deeper than I had prepared for. But it was Olivia who broke my heart. She came home from school in tears, her backpack dragging behind her, her face red and blotchy. "They said you married Claire for money," she sobbed, climbing into my lap. "They said we're not a real family. They said you're a liar." I held my daughter tight, feeling something crack inside me. Daddy, Olivia's voice was small and afraid. Are we a real family? I couldn't answer. I didn't know how. That night, after both children were asleep, I started packing. Claire found me in the guest room folding clothes into suitcases with mechanical precision. What are you doing? I'm leaving. I'm taking Olivia and we're going. This was a mistake. Ryan, we can fight this. My lawyers are already working on. It's not about the lawyers. I finally turned to face her and she flinched at what she saw in my eyes. My daughter got bullied at school today because of me, because of this, because I made a deal I never should have made. We'll get through it together. No, my voice cracked. I can't keep dragging her into this. I can't keep pretending that any amount of money is worth watching my child cry herself to sleep. I grabbed the last of my shirts and shoved them into the bag. I'm sorry, I know what this means for your case, but Olivia comes first. She always has to come first. Claire stood frozen in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. And us? The question came out barely above a whisper. What about us? I couldn't look at her. If I looked at her, I might stay. If I stayed, I might never be able to leave. There is no us. There never was. It was always just a contract. I walked past her without another word, my heart shattering with every step. The courtroom was cold. Claire sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded in her lap, her posture perfect despite the weight pressing down on her shoulders. Across the aisle, Derek looked like a man who had already won. His lawyers had spent the morning dismantling her character piece by piece. The tabloid articles, the photographs, the testimony from Jennifer about how Claire had openly discussed needing a husband on paper. It had been weeks since I walked out of her house, weeks since I had watched her load my suitcases into my car and drive away without looking back. Weeks of sleeping alone in a bed that suddenly felt too large. Of watching Caleb ask every morning when Dad Ryan was coming home. She had no answer for him. She barely had answers for herself. Mrs. Bennett, Derek's attorney, a silver-haired man with the smile of a shark, approached the stand where she sat. You entered into a contractual arrangement with your employee, Ryan Mitchell, correct? It began that way, yes. And you paid him a substantial sum in exchange for his participation in this arrangement. Claire's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The judge's face remained impassive, but I could see the judgment forming behind his eyes. Your Honor, Derek's attorney continued, turning to address the bench directly. My client's only concern is the welfare of his son. Caleb deserves a stable home environment, not a household built on financial transactions and manufactured affection. Mrs. Bennett couldn't even maintain her own fabricated marriage. Mr. Mitchell left her weeks ago. What does that say about her ability to provide consistency for a child? Claire wanted to argue. She wanted to stand up and tell them about the nights I had spent teaching Caleb to catch a football, about the way Olivia had started calling her mommy, about the family we had become when no one was watching and no contract was involved. But I wasn't there, and without me, she was just a woman who had tried to buy her way out of a custody battle and failed. The judge called for a brief recess before closing arguments. Claire's attorney leaned over to whisper that they should prepare for an unfavorable ruling. She nodded, numb already, calculating how many weekends a month she might be allowed to see her son. Then the courtroom doors opened. I walked in, wearing the same suit I had worn to our courthouse wedding, my jaw set, my eyes finding hers across the room. Behind me, holding my hand, was Olivia, and beside her, Patricia Mitchell, frail but standing tall, her arm linked through her granddaughter's. The murmur that rippled through the courtroom was immediate. Your Honor, my voice cut through the noise. I would like to request permission to provide testimony. Derek's attorney shot to his feet. Objection, this man abandoned the marriage. His testimony is irrelevant. But the judge raised a hand, silencing him. She studied me with an unreadable expression, then nodded slowly. I'll allow it. Mr. Mitchell, please take the stand. I walked past Claire without looking at her. I couldn't. Not yet. If I looked at her now, I might lose the words I had rehearsed in my car for the past hours. The speech I had practiced in front of my mother until she told me to stop talking and just go. I took my seat on the witness stand and faced the courtroom. Mr. Mitchell, the judge began, you understand you are under oath. Yes, Your Honor. Then please explain to the court why you're here today, given that you reportedly left Mrs. Bennett's residence weeks ago. I took a breath. I thought about Olivia's face when she asked if we were a real family. I thought about Caleb calling me Dad Ryan for the first time. I thought about Claire holding my daughter through a nightmare, singing a lullaby to a child who wasn't hers. Your Honor, I want to start by being completely honest. My voice was steady, stronger than I felt. Yes, in the beginning, this was an arrangement. Claire needed a husband to strengthen her custody case. I needed money to pay for my mother's surgery. We made a deal. I'm not going to stand here and pretend otherwise. Derek's attorney smiled triumphantly. Claire closed her eyes. But here's what the tabloids didn't report, I continued. Here's what those photographs couldn't capture. I turned to look directly at Derek. They didn't show you the night your son called me Dad Ryan for the first time. They didn't show me lying awake afterward crying in the dark because I didn't know if I deserved it. They didn't show Claire learning how to braid my daughter's hair from YouTube tutorials or the way Olivia laughed when Claire got it wrong for the 5th time, but kept trying anyway. My voice grew stronger. You want to know what a real family looks like? A real family is what happened when my daughter had a nightmare and screamed for her mommy, and Claire was the one who came running. Claire, who never had to love Olivia, who could have treated her like a prop in our arrangement, chose instead to become the mother my daughter never had. I stood from the witness chair, unable to contain myself any longer. I left because I was scared. I left because when the scandal broke and my daughter came home crying, I blamed myself for putting her in that position. I thought walking away was protecting her. I shook my head. But I was wrong. Running away from the people who love you isn't protection. It's cowardice. I turned to face Claire now, and I saw that her eyes were wet. You asked me once if we would sleep in the same bed. I built walls between us that night, literal walls made of pillows, because I was terrified of what it would mean if I let myself feel something real. But those walls came down. They came down every time you laughed at dinner, every time you helped Caleb with his homework, every time you looked at me like I was more than just a name on a contract. I took a step toward her. I love you, not because of the money, not because of the arrangement. I love you because you showed me that family isn't about blood or paperwork. It's about who shows up. And I'm showing up now, Claire. I'm showing up because I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life, not because we have to, because I choose to. The courtroom was silent. The judge cleared her throat. Mr. Mitchell, please return to your seat. I sat. My heart was pounding so hard I was certain everyone could hear it. The judge took a long moment to review her notes. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured but not unkind. This court has seen a great deal of evidence regarding the origins of the marriage between Claire Bennett and Ryan Mitchell. It is clear that the relationship began as a legal arrangement designed to influence these proceedings. She looked up from her papers. However, it is also clear to this court that whatever the marriage began as, it has evolved into something genuine. The testimony I've heard today, not just from Mr. Mitchell, but from the visible bond between these two families, suggests a household where a child would be loved, supported, and cared for. She turned to Derek. Mr. Bennett, your concerns for your son are noted. However, this court finds no evidence that Mrs. Bennett is an unfit parent. On the contrary, the evidence suggests that Caleb has thrived in her care and in the family environment she has created. She struck her gavel. Custody of the minor child, Caleb Bennett, shall remain with his mother, Claire Bennett. This case is dismissed. The sound that escaped Claire's throat was somewhere between a sob and a laugh. She turned to find me already moving toward her, and then my arms were around her and she was crying into my shoulder while the courtroom dissolved into chaos around us. You came back, she whispered. I never should have left. Outside the courthouse, Olivia and Caleb were waiting with Patricia, the two children holding hands like they had been doing it their whole lives. Are we a real family now? Olivia asked, looking up at me with hopeful eyes. I knelt down so I was at her level. We always were, baby girl. I just forgot for a little while, but I'm never going to forget again. Months later, we held another wedding. This time there were flowers and music and guests who had no idea they were attending a second ceremony for a couple already legally married. Olivia served as flower girl, scattering petals with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Caleb stood proudly beside me as ring bearer, though he and Olivia had argued beforehand about who would actually carry the rings. They compromised by each carrying one. Patricia Mitchell sat in the front row, healthy and glowing after months of recovery, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief she had embroidered herself. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife again, I kissed Claire like it was the first time, because in many ways it was. That night, after the reception had ended and the children were asleep and the house had finally grown quiet, Claire and I lay in bed together. No pillow barriers, no pretense, just two people who had found each other against impossible odds. Claire turned to face me, a playful smile tugging at her lips. So, she said, echoing the question that had started everything, are we going to sleep in the same bed? I pulled her closer, my hand finding the familiar curve of her waist. Every night, I said, from now until forever. And for the first time in my life, forever didn't feel like a prison. It felt like coming home. Looking back at everything that happened between Claire and me, the one lesson that still hits me right in the chest is this. Real family and real love aren't something you can buy or fake through a contract. They're built in the quiet moments when you choose to show up, even when fear and pride are screaming at you to run. I almost lost it all because I let my walls stay up too long. I was so scared of getting hurt again, so ashamed of needing help, that I walked away from the woman who had become a real mother to my little Olivia and the partner who saw me for who I truly was. But love isn't about where you start. It's about having the courage to tear those pillow barriers down and let someone in. It's about a little boy calling you Dad Ryan and a woman who learns to braid hair from YouTube just to make your daughter smile. If you're out there building walls because life has knocked you down before, I hope our story reminds you that the best things happen when you finally choose to stay and fight for the people who matter. If this story moved you as much as it still moves me, tell me in the comments, what moment broke you the most? Was it the courtroom speech, little Olivia calling Claire mommy, or that final kiss that felt like coming home? Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so we can keep sharing these heartfelt stories together. I read every single comment and can't wait to hear from you.